Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today, and I really mean that. I mean it every day. But we have fascinating interviews with Michael Shellenberger, one of my favorite guests, also Senator Rand Paul to talk about his clash with Trump over tariffs, and Faz Shakur, one of your ideological fellow travelers, former Bernie Sanders campaign director, who we're going to talk to about really exciting stuff.
Yes, he is one of my ideological fellow travelers, but we're all Americans and we need to understand what's going on in this country. A lot is going on. Last night was a big night. I'm sure you'll have some things to brag about. I'll have some things to be excited about. So let's get started. What's on your radar?
Happy to tell you, Marianne. Nina Jankowicz, a name our viewers might recall, is the former director of the Department of Homeland Security's Disinformation Governance Board, an entity that purported to advise the Biden administration on how best to counter online misinformation, but was shuttered after drawing the ire of conservatives and libertarians like myself. Like so many other purported disinfo experts, Jankowicz's track record of identifying actual lies is decidedly mixed. She had dutifully joined the intelligence community and much of the mainstream media, for instance, in wrongly asserting that the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story was disinformation peddled by Russia. Now, she personally expressed the view that the straightforward explanation, Hunter Biden left his laptop at a repair shop, was a fairy tale. Oopsies. But like so many other former government intelligence officials who were fundamentally wrong about pivotal issues pertaining to their area of expertise, Jankowicz is fated to fall upward. She is now the president of the Sunlight Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting transparency, though the group does not disclose its source of funding. That intriguing policy, some would say execrable hypocrisy, was noted by Representative Michael Baumgardner during a fiery congressional subcommittee hearing on Tuesday. Jankowicz testified alongside one of her most ardent critics, my friend, the independent journalist Matt Taibbi, whose work exposing the federal government's efforts to compel social media companies to censor contrarian speech was a major driver of negative attention to projects like the Disinformation Governance Board. Taibbi's Twitter files, as well as similar projects like my own Facebook files, demonstrated that aggressive moderation of dissident opinions online was not a choice freely made by social media companies. It was forced on them by government agents who were themselves misinformed about the facts.
To start, Ms. Jankowicz, your organization, the American Sunlight Project, claims to have a commitment to transparency and apparently does not extend to disclosing its donors. Has the American Sunlight Project received funding either directly or indirectly from the George Soros or his foundations, including the Open Society Foundation?
Thank you, Congressman. I've received a lot of threats for speaking out, and so I've decided that we are going to abide by the rules that other 501c4s in our country abide by, and we are not required to disclose our donors, small or large, because I frankly don't want them to be threatened the way that I have been.
So sunlight for other people, but not for your donors.
I guess transparency is good for you, not for Nina Jankowicz. Now, as you just heard, she defended the Sunlight Foundation's lack of transparency on grounds that she has personally faced bullying as a result of her anti-disinfo advocacy, and she wished to spare her backers from such a fate. She also tore into Taibbi, accusing him of failing to understand the implications of the information he uncovered and the social media censorship stories he had reported on. She said, quote, Mr. Taibbi said when he was first searching through the so-called Twitter files, he didn't know what he was looking at. Well, he still doesn't. Everything looks like a conspiracy when you don't know how anything works, end quote. That's a bold claim from someone who bought into a conspiracy theory about the Biden laptop's provenance. In any case, Jankowicz proceeded to flatly assert that the State Department's Global Engagement Center, charged with countering foreign propaganda, was never engaged in anything approaching censorship. This claim is abjectly false and collapses under scrutiny. Let's watch some of her testimony and then I'll explain.
Something I think the Republicans on this committee would be very interested in, tracking and countering Chinese state propaganda targeting Americans. Now, I used to manage State Department grants early in my career. I know that that is a huge fiduciary responsibility. You have to account for every single penny that you're spending on travel, on staff time, on supplies, and you have to do it multiple times a year. So for folks to sit here and say that grants dedicated to countering CCP propaganda were somehow spent on conservative blacklists is just ridiculous. And I'll also add that that is those organizations' speech to be able to do research and categorize news sites as they see fit. A letter sent to the Senate last week shows that actually a lot of conservative organizations, including the Heritage Foundation, the Wall Street Journal, Reason, Cato Institute, and the Washington Free Beacon, all received great ratings by NewsGuard, while the Daily Kos only got a 45 out of 100.
I want to dig a little deeper here. Now, at issue are two independent anti-disinfo organizations, NewsGuard and the Global Disinformation Index, that received funding from the State Department. In her testimony, Jankowicz acknowledged that these organizations were federally funded, although she defended the grants as being focused on combating Chinese government propaganda rather than encouraging censorship of American media entities. All right, we'll return to that in a minute. Jankowicz subsequently took issue with the idea that NewsGuard was biased against right-leaning news sources, noting that several, quote, conservative organizations, including the Wall Street Journal, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and Reason, where I also work, had received favorable evaluations. Neither Reason nor Cato identify themselves as conservative, of course. Alas, this is precisely the sort of sloppiness one has by now come to expect from the anti-disinfo experts. It's true, in any case, that NewsGuard favorably evaluated Reason, my other employer, but the Global Disinformation Index, the GDI, is another matter entirely. This organization, a British nonprofit backed by the State Department, listed Reason as one of the 10 riskiest news outlets, warned advertisers against appearing on their website. GDI's stated rationale for this purported danger was inscrutable. I tried to get to the bottom of it. They wouldn't talk to me about it. The disinfo cops accused us of having unclear authorship policies, which is simply not true. And Reason was far from the only disfavored news source. GDI targeted the New York Post, Real Clear Politics, the Daily Wire, the Blaze, the American Conservative, and the Washington Examiner. Now, the Examiner subsequently took a closer look at the GDI's operations and determined that its missives to advertisers to avoid risky libertarian and conservative news sites were partly based on the idea that we were promoting COVID-19 misinformation. Specifically, GDI was shaming these websites for including commentary that COVID-19 may have leaked from a Chinese lab. This theory, labeled a, quote, coronavirus conspiracy by GDI, is now, of course, determined by the FBI, CIA, and Energy Department to be the most plausible explanation for the pandemic's origins. Oopsies again. Wait a minute, though. Wasn't Jankowicz defending the State Department's decision to fund these anti-disinfo organizations on grounds that they were merely using those taxpayer dollars to counter Chinese government propaganda? Well, GDI tried to suppress the idea that COVID-19 could have emerged from a Chinese lab under lax safety conditions, a disaster that was subsequently hidden by Chinese officials. Given that millions of people died all over the world as a result of the pandemic, any organizations, let me be clear, running cover for the Chinese government on this topic is effectively complicit in the Chinese government's most essential propaganda campaign. So much for the State Department paying disinfo cops to counter foreign misinformation. When it came to COVID-19's origins, the GDI enforced the misinformation. And Jankowicz is still defending them. So I watched this hearing with great interest yesterday, Marianne, and this is a theme we've talked about on Rising quite a bit. But they say, oh yeah, we're not doing censorship, we're not funding censorship, we're funding countering of Chinese propaganda. They were actually funding the enforcement of Chinese propaganda because they were trying to get advertisers not to work with news websites that raise questions about the lab leak origin, among many other things. And this is my whole problem with this industry, Marianne. You and I disagree on things. We argue about it. We talk about it. That's how things should work. These disinfo people purport to be the referees. We know what's disinformation, and we're not going to allow that or discuss that. But they get it wrong just as much as anybody else.
Robby, I think that at the deepest level, this isn't even a right-left issue. The word that I think is most operative is not disinfo, but referee. Whether it's coming from the Republicans who are with this anti-DEI stuff, the president saying they want to rewrite what museums put in their exhibits, whether it has to do with them telling cultural institutions or universities or anything else, you can say this and you can't say that, or the things that you, I think, very rightfully pointed out. Whether it's coming from Democrats or Republicans, we have to be alert to it and not like it. The idea that any political sector would seek to engineer and to manipulate the dispersal of information itself is dangerous. And that's why I think this should be an American issue. This should be an ethical issue. This should not even be left-right. So if you call them out on the left, good for you. And I want to call them out on the right, as do others. It's dangerous. Americans, if we can't trust that we are getting proper information, then we can't do our best thinking, and we can't be the governance force of the country that the populace needs to be in a democracy.
I think I agree with that.
Good.
American taxpayers, I don't think, want their money being spent to encourage censorship in any direction. Do they want the government trying to micromanage the things you're talking about or the things I'm talking about? Of course not. And also the First Amendment is pretty clear that they shouldn't try to do that. So we need to leave each other alone in terms of policing each other's speech, have robust conversations, dialogues. I think it's fine and even cool to have Matt Taibbi and Nina Jankowicz, two people who could not be more radically different, in conversation with each other, arguing about it. But, you know, she made some pretty provocative claims there, and I think I was able to effectively pick them apart, but I'll let people be the judge of that.
Yeah, congratulations to you. I think, though, that this all gets down to ethics. I think that this country has lost some of these basic characterological commitments that are so important for right living, both as individuals and as a nation. We need to be ethical. Part of being ethical is you tell the truth and you don't try to mess it up and manipulate it so that other people will think what you want them to think. Not cool. Not cool. From the other side of the political spectrum.
Well, thank you very much. Like we said in the opening, some really great interviews coming up today. Faye Shakur, Rand Paul, Michael Schellenberger. We can't wait to get to it. Also, lots more to discuss, including some election results from last night. Stay with us. More Rising right after this.